So I'm delighted to be joined by Luigi Zingales, Professor of Finance at Chicago Booth and co-host of the Capitalism podcast. So Luigi, you've just written a paper with Oliver Hart on the new corporate governance. Just explain to us, what is this idea?
So what we have been noticing in the last couple of years is being an explosion of proposal at shareholders meeting that involves the environment, the social activity, and so on and so forth, where not only we had the extremists making the proposal, but we had an increasing number of shareholders voting in favor, and in some cases even getting a majority. And we look at our books and said, this is not what we teach, because we teach that, first of all, shareholders care only about maximizing value, and they should be pretty unanimous on deciding how to do that. And so we started to rethink about this. Now, my co-author, Oliver Hart, has been at this much longer than I've been, and he actually wrote some of the fundamental paper on shareholder unanimity back in the 70s. So I think that he has a long lineage of studying this problem. And so I think it was fascinating revisiting with him this literature and say, at the end of the day, there is nothing magic about shareholder value maximization. And in reality, if you are a large shareholder, especially a privately held company, you do whatever you want, which includes maximizing some other objectives. And the problem is that the moment we cooperate with a lot of shareholders, etc., the social norms and to some extent even the legal norms push you to a conformity, push you to basically the minimum common denominator, which is just money. And as a result, I think that the companies are becoming more and more amoral, not necessarily immoral, but amoral, because they don't have any other sort of feeling except the one of making as much money as they want, as they can.
So that idea that shareholders have perhaps kind of social moral objectives, I mean, that sounds eminently sensible, and you can sort of see how that works where you have a founder or a privately owned company. But when we have, diverse investors, multiple investors, perhaps hundreds, even thousands of investors with different moral views, it sounds kind of hard to come to a consensus on what these non-financial objectives should be. So in practice, how would you bring this idea to life?
Actually, that sounds like democracy, right? In the real world, in the political world, we have a lot of diverse view, and we try to bring them together through a vote. And we don't see why that could not be the case in the case of corporations. And there is a big advantage in corporation is that you have intermediaries, like financial institutions, like BlackRock or Vanguard, etc., who can do most of the work for you, a little bit like political parties do in the political election. So in a democracy, you don't choose on every single decision that passes through parliament. You choose a party, and then you hope that the party more or less represents what you want. And so the idea is, why don't we apply this simple idea to corporate election, in which you have kind of a platform, and I want X, Y, and Z, or I'm happy to sacrifice up to X in order to achieve Y. So imagine that you care about greenhouse emission, and you say, I want this company to behave as if greenhouse emission at a cost of $100 per ton. So it's basically a self-imposed carbon tax. Yeah. There is nothing that prevents you from doing that, and you can moderate it and say as if it's $100 or $50 or $200, and so you're not saying we should stop doing anything because that would be too aggressive. It's not also laissez-faire anything. Something in between.
So in this model, I mean, intermediaries in effect sort of create choices for investors to sign up to a particular platform, which I guess brings me on to one of the challenges to the idea, which is around democratic legitimacy, because on a sort of vote-weighted basis, shareholders are generally kind of wealthy people. So you could, for example, have a situation, I don't know if this is true, but let's suppose wealthy people care more about climate change, and through this mechanism they force companies to transition much more quickly. That damages people working in coal mining communities or the fossil fuel industry. their prospects are damaged without the compensating forces that might happen through a political process. So how do you respond to the accusation that this is just a way for kind of rich people to get their political preferences met round the back of the political system?
I think that's a very important question, and here I want to make sure that I answer for myself. I don't want to implicate my co-author or co-authors, but I make a gigantic distinction between what I call private provision of public good and what I call political engagement. Okay? Private provision of public good, we are not particularly upset if a rich donor decides to donate money for the symphony orchestra, for the room we're in today at a university, or to provide education to young children. Okay? If he or she pays with their own money, we are not in general society saying we don't want that person to do it because he's rich and somehow distort the system. Okay? And so when I'm talking about care about the environment, etc., this is above and beyond what the law mandates, and that's a private provision of public good. And so I want that the person paying for it decides what they do. This is basically taxation with representation, because at the end of the day, if this costs money to the shareholders, they should be the one who decide. Okay? Now, can customers or employees impact this? Absolutely. They can say, I'm willing to pay a salary of X% less if you company do Y. And actually, most of the time they do it with their feet, because there are people that, for example, work in law firms, and they explicitly choose the non-tobacco sort of career path because they don't want to defend the tobacco industry. And actually, they make less money. So the people choose with their feet. You can choose with their feet as a consumer. You can get fair trade coffee, or you can so it's very easy to choose with their feet. Paradoxically, this is the stuff that is very hard for non-economists to understand, but paradoxically, the one who cannot choose with their feet are shareholders. Why? You say, but you can sell on the market every day. Yes, but the price at which you sell reflects the policy, and so you are taxed no matter what. So that's the reason why I think in that particular issue, we should have a shareholders vote to influence. Yeah. This is very different with respect to political engagement. So when Disney activates to fight the law passed in Florida, I see this as paradoxically a very dangerous political engagement, because it's true that they say we represent the workers, but first of all, the CEO is not elected by the workers, so they say that he's representing workers is a bit, and then number two, which workers? The one in Florida, the one in the United States, the one in the world. And do we really want a CEO to respond to the demand of workers? Imagine that you are an American company with the majority of workers in China. So the American company should act in the interest of the Chinese. So I think it's a very, very dangerous slippery slope, even if I don't like the law in Florida. So this is not about the outcome, whether I like it or not, is about the process. And I think that I see as very dangerous a process in which companies engage in the political debate as separate entity, because is kind of, since we are in Oxford here, is kind of the old tradition of overmighty citizens in the United States, of people who have two votes. Oxford used to have multiple votes, right? Vote as individual professor and vote as Oxford. And thank God it was cancelled because it was over-representation of some interest. And I feel that corporations tend to be overmighty citizens.
So another challenge, I guess, is one that may be paraphrasing the sort of Lucia Bebcher view of the world, which is that actually this is all a bit of a distraction, and actually a dangerous distraction, because this impact of shareholders via the companies they invest in is really like bringing a pea shooter to a gunfight in relation to the problems that we're facing as a society, and is distracting from the proper way of doing these things, which is through the political process.
What I call this is the radical view that the worse the better, because the more devastated the war, the more you have a political reaction. This is kind of the extreme communist view that helping workers was bad because it was delayed at the time of the revolution. I don't think it worked that well in that particular situation. I think that this is not the issue. I think we are very clear that we don't see that as a substitute to political engagement, but we see that as a complement. And it's like saying, I'm going to prohibit people from doing charity because that will reduce the chances of having Social Security. That seems to be absurd.
So I guess the final question then, I mean, to some degree this is already happening, right? We're seeing this being played out in reality in terms of how shareholder proposals are being put forward and shareholders are voting, as you've described. What do you see as the next big step in kind of moving this whole agenda forward into practice?
Oh, the next big step is to make it feasible for shareholders to express their views. So I think very few people appreciate the fact that, at least in the United States, the SEC was strongly discouraging to have any proposal that interfere with ordinary business matter. And so, wait a minute, what do you want to interfere with? With the weather? It's like the British conversation. You can talk about everything except it's religion, sex, and politics. And that's the interesting thing to talk about, right? And the same is in corporation. You want to say to Walmart, I don't want you to sell automatic rifles, okay? I use this on purpose because in 2017, the SEC rejected this as a proposal, and it was upheld by the court. So it was considered right not to have the shareholders' view on this. Well, I think that's exactly the kind of proposal you want the shareholders to express their opinion, because it's going to cost money not to sell machine guns. But most of us are willing to sacrifice a little bit of return in order to have a safer environment. And particularly in an area where constitutional amendments and stuff like that make it very difficult for democracy to work. So this is the example that says how unfounded Badger position is, because you can't fix this easily through the political process. Before you reform the US Constitution, you need like an act of God or a revolution. I think that, I think is much more easily done. And because we live in a very concentrated world, this makes a gigantic difference. And it says, if 2 or 3 companies don't sell machine guns in their stores, they make it difficult to buy machine guns, especially if you buy on an impulse because you want to commit like a mass shooting. So I think that that's an example of where this stuff can matter a lot.
Luigi, thanks very much.
My pleasure.